My name is Ismail Vargas, I'm 38 years old, and I live in Querétaro, in the Alamos neighborhood. Until that Saturday in June 2019, I was what everyone called a man of God, a worship leader for 12 years at the Assemblies of God Church, married to Patricia, and the father of Mateo, 14, and Valentina, 9. To those who saw me from the outside, I was the perfect example of a faithful servant. I owned a hardware store on Constituyentes Avenue, a business that God had blessed me with. As I always said, I had 15,000 followers on Instagram. I posted verses every day, photos of my family smiling, the victorious Christian life that everyone envied. My brothers and sisters at church asked me for prayer, they called me for advice. They thought I had a close relationship with God, if only they knew the truth, because behind that suit I wore every Sunday, those hymns I sang with his eyes closed and my hand raised, there was a man no one knew. Since I was 15, I had been addicted to pornography. I hid his cell phone even from Patricia. In the glove compartment of my truck, I had a Bible full of notes and colored bookmarks, and underneath it, hidden, a USB drive that I would never let anyone see. My marriage was a lie, too. Patricia and I had slept in separate rooms for 2 years. We only pretended to be harmonious in front of others. At home, I was cold, rude, and treated her like she was my employee. The boys were afraid of me, especially Mateo. He even avoided looking me in the eye when I got home from work. At the hardware store, it was even worse. I yelled at the employees when they made a mistake. I insulted them and humiliated them in front of everyone. There was a 19-year-old boy named Felipe who once accidentally knocked over a bag of cement. I yelled at him, calling him incompetent and an idiot. I told him I was going to deduct it from his pay. The kid left crying, and I even laughed about it later with another employee. But the worst thing happened in April of that year. I was the treasurer of the church's missions offering, and one Sunday I counted the envelope. There were 12,000 pesos. I wrote down 4,000 on the minutes and pocketed 8,000. I used it to pay off online gambling debts, a secret vice no one ever suspected I had. I thought, God will repay me anyway, He knows I need it. I judged everyone, especially those who weren't evangelical Christians. There was a co-worker, Donato, who was an atheist and always made fun of the Bible. I always told others that he was going to burn in hell. Lucia, my neighbor in the housing complex, was agnostic, and I avoided even greeting her properly. In my mind, I was superior because I knew God. What an irony. Then came that Saturday, June 15, 2019, at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was returning from a church leadership meeting. I was driving along Bernardo Quintana Boulevard, nearby Centennial Park, and I had my cell phone in my hand. I was writing in the church's WhatsApp group. Do you know what I wrote, brothers and sisters? I'm driving right now, pray for me, that God may protect me, with a praying hands emoji. It was exactly at that second that I ran the red light. I didn't even see the white car coming towards me. The impact was so strong that my truck spun around and was thrown against a utility pole. I felt an excruciating pain in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I heard people screaming, someone saying, "Call an ambulance." I saw a woman approaching with her cell phone in her hand. My last conscious thought was, not now, Lord, I still have to preach at the youth conference next month. I still have so much to do for the kingdom. I tried to breathe once more, but my lungs wouldn't obey. Everything went dark, and that's when something very strange began to happen, something I never, ever imagined was possible. Suddenly, I was outside my body. I can't really explain how it happened, but I was floating about 3 meters above the truck, which was completely wrecked. I could see my body down there, trapped in the metal, my face covered in blood. 2 girls from the ambulance had just arrived, one a dark-skinned woman and the other a brunette with glasses. They were trying to check my vital signs. I tried to shout, "I'm up here, I didn't die." But no sound came out of my mouth, or rather, I didn't even have a mouth at that moment. It was just consciousness, just thought. A crowd of people gathered, taking pictures with their cell phones, and there I was, screaming without being heard. It was maddening to realize that I was invisible, that no one could see me floating there. Then I felt something pulling me. It wasn't a hand, it wasn't anything physical. It was as if a gigantic force had grabbed me from the inside and started dragging me, and I wasn't being pulled upward, like I always heard in church testimonies. I was being pulled downward, as if the ground had opened up and something was sucking me into the earth. I entered a tunnel, but it wasn't that tunnel of white light that everyone talks about. It was dark red, throbbing as if it were alive, like veins swollen with blood. The first thing that crossed my mind was, this is a test, God is testing me like he did Job. I began shouting all the prayers I knew, all the memorized verses, everything I had learned in 23 years of gospel. I rebuke, I shouted as I descended faster and faster, I rebuke this deception of the enemy. Satan, you have no power over me, I am covered by the blood of Jesus. But the more I rebuked, the faster I was being dragged down. My words had no power there. It was like shouting into the void, as if God simply wasn't listening. The heat began to increase in a way I had never felt in my life. It wasn't like when you burn your hand on the stove or when you get too much sun at the beach. This heat came from within, burning into my bones, as if my skeleton were on fire from the inside, and there was a horrible, burnt smell, the kind of smell that sticks in your throat and makes you nauseous. As I descended through that red tunnel, I began to hear whispers. They weren't clear words at first, they were like murmurs of several voices at the same time. Little by little, I began to understand what they were saying. He is ours, he always was ours, he finally came. That terrified me more than anything, because I knew exactly who was speaking. Then, the tunnel finally ended and I was thrown into an immense corridor of black stone. The walls seemed sweaty, glowing with that red of the flames I saw in the distance. There were screams echoing everywhere, people pleading for help, crying, shouting names. I stood paralyzed there for a few seconds, still trying to process that this wasn't a nightmare. That's when I saw the wall closest to me. There was something written on it, as if engraved in the stone with letters that seemed to burn. I approached, trembling, and almost fainted when I read Ismael Vargas. My name, my full name was there engraved on that wall of hell, and below it was a date, April 15, 2019. That date hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew exactly what had happened that day. It was when I stole the 8,000 pesos from the missions offering. The day I stole from God and still felt smart. No. I screamed, staring at the wall. This can't be here. I asked for forgiveness. I'm a worship leader, I've served God for years, but there it was, permanently etched like a sentence that couldn't be erased, and it was at that moment I realized, I wasn't on a test, I was exactly where I deserved to be. I was still staring at the wall with my name on it when I heard a woman's voice crying. I turned around and almost fell over at what I saw. It was Remedios, the intercession leader at my church. Remedios was 52 years old. She was that sister everyone admired, who fasted 3 times a week, who arrived at church at 5 a.m. to pray. If there was anyone I was sure would be in heaven, it was her, Remedios. I shouted, running up to her, "What are you doing here? There must be some mistake." She raised her face to me, and I'll never forget that look. It was pure shame, complete humiliation. "Ismael," she said, her voice breaking, "there's no mistake, I deserve to be here." I shook my head. It didn't make any sense, it had to be a lie. Remedios wiped away her tears and began to speak. "I was pretending, Ismael, it was all an act. All those prayers, those fasts, those early mornings at church, it was all to be seen, to be admired." She told me she secretly cast spells. Can you believe it? She would take photos of people from the church and perform rituals to bind them there so they wouldn't leave, and she would remain the important leader. She said it was intercession, but it was manipulation, it was witchcraft. She was deathly envious of the beautiful women in the church, she confessed, envy of the younger women the men looked at. Then she would invent gossip, destroy their reputations, and create problems between couples. She said he prayed in tongues, but with hatred in his heart, cursing people while pretending to bless them. I liked using God's name to hurt others, Ismael. It gave me power, made me feel superior. I was in shock, unable to respond to anything. Before I could process all of that, I heard another voice I knew. "Welcome to our group, Ismail." It was Crisanto, the assistant pastor of the church, 45 years old. Crisanto was the man I wanted to be. He preached about holiness every Sunday, about purity, surviving apart from the world. His sermons made me cry, made me want to be better, and he was there. Crisanto approached me with a bitter smile. "I see your surprised face. Everyone reacts like this when they get here and see me." I asked him, "Pastor Crisanto, what happened? Why are you here?" He took a deep breath and began to recount, each word worse than the last. First he said, "I had a problem with pornography, Ismail, just like you." My heart froze when I knew it, but it wasn't just pornography. Crisanto continued, "There were underage children in the images I saw, children, teenagers. I felt like throwing up." But he wasn't finished, and it wasn't just seeing Ismail. "I abused the young women at the church, 3 girls over the years. I threatened them, telling them I was tempting them, that if they told anyone they would go to hell." Tears streamed down his face as he spoke, but they weren't tears of repentance, they were tears of shame for having been caught. "I took money from the church to pay for motels, to give them gifts, to buy their silence, son. I preached holiness from the pulpit and destroyed lives behind the scenes. My wife Norma never knew anything. She's going to die thinking she was married to a man of God. That was too much for me." I walked away from him with disgust, with anger, with fear. Fear because I was beginning to understand the pattern. It wasn't the sinners who were there, it was us. Then I saw someone more familiar, Esteban, the famous missionary who every year raised enormous offerings for God's work in Africa, 50 years old, always with those photos of himself hugging African children, building wells, handing out Bibles. Esteban saw me and let out a humorless laugh. "Do you want to know the truth, Ismail? I never set foot in Africa even once. Those photos were stolen from the internet from real missionaries." He told me that he got 50,000 to 60,000 pesos a year, saying it was for missions. He spent it all on imported booze, drugs, and high-class prostitutes. "I lived like a king while the poor brothers in the church collected coins to help me." Esteban looked at me and said, "We preached salvation, Ismail, but we lived exactly like the devil. The difference is that we did it with the Bible in our hands." I was stunned, my head spinning, trying to understand where I was and why I was surrounded by leaders of my church, but the worst was yet to come, because it was at that moment that I saw Doña Edelmira approaching, and what she told me completely destroyed any hope I still had that this was a mistake. Doña Edelmira was 78 years old. She was the long-suffering widow of the church, the one everyone helped, the one everyone admired for her unwavering faith after losing her husband. She looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Ismail, son, I need to tell you the truth, because lying won't do any good here anymore." My stomach churned before she even began to speak. "I killed my husband in 1995, she said simply, as if commenting on the weather. "He discovered that I was diverting money from mission offerings. For years I did that," Doña Edelmira continued. "When he threatened to expose me, I started putting rat poison in his juice little by little. For 6 months, she told me her husband was wasting away. The doctors thought it was cancer, and she cried in the hospital, feigning despair. When he died, I became the pious widow, the poor thing everyone helped. I played that role for 24 years, Ismail, and every Sunday I cried in the pulpit, and it was all a lie. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of that hallway. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be that all the leaders I admired were there. As I ran aimlessly, I started thinking about the people I was sure would be in that place. Donato, my co-worker who was an avowed atheist, who mocked the Bible, who called believers alienated. He was definitely going to be there. I started searching for him desperately. I looked at every face in those hellish corridors. I shouted his name, "Donato, Donato." I walked through several different places. I passed by hundreds of people screaming and suffering, but Donato wasn't anywhere. It was then that a hooded figure, who I don't know if it was a demon or what, let out a sarcastic laugh near me. "Looking for Donato, right?" it said. "He's not here, Pastor. "What do you mean he's not here?" I shouted. "He's an atheist. He mocked God. He has to be here." The figure just laughed louder and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there, confused, trying to understand. I started thinking about other people. Lucia, my neighbor in the housing complex, she was agnostic. She said she didn't believe in God or that religion was a human invention, but she donated 30% of her salary to the orphanage. She visited the elderly at the nursing home every Saturday. She was kind to everyone. I looked for her too, but she wasn't there. Then I remembered Octavio, a guy who had been in our church when he was younger. He had strayed at 20, today he was 40. He had become agnostic. I always told the brothers, Octavio is going to burn in eternal fire. Whoever knew the truth and rejected it has no forgiveness. But Octavio was an exemplary father, honest in his business, and treated everyone with respect. I looked for him in every corner of that horrible place. He wasn't there either, but the search that destroyed me the most was for the person I hated most at work, Todora, who was openly gay, had worked with me for 5 years. I preached against homosexuality, called it an abomination to the other employees. I even avoided shaking his hand. As he approached, I quoted Leviticus in my head, feeling holy for rejecting sin. I was absolutely certain that if anyone was in that hell, it was Theodore. I searched for him even more intensely, wanting to confirm my judgment. I spent hours, or maybe it was minutes, I don't know. Time was strange there, but I searched that place from end to end looking for Theodore, and he wasn't there. I fell to my knees on the hot stone floor. The truth finally hitting me, the abomination is in heaven, I whispered to myself, and I, the saint, am in hell. Tears of despair streamed down my face as I grasped the absurdity of the situation. I also remembered Armando, my cousin, who had become an atheist at 25. I cut ties with him. I didn't go to his wedding. I told the whole family that he was going to burn in eternal fire. Armando was always a good person, honest, hardworking, a good son, but he was an atheist, so, in my mind, he was doomed. I looked for him too. Even though I already imagined the answer, Armando wasn't there, none of them were. It was in that moment of total confusion and despair that I felt a different presence behind me. It was stronger than the others, heavier, as if the air itself were becoming dense. I turned around slowly and saw a hooded figure much larger than the previous one, with eyes that seemed like fire. "Surprised by what you're finding here, Ismail?" The voice was deep and resonant. "Let me explain some things that you religious people never understood up there." And that's when the most terrifying revelation of all began. The being introduced itself. "My name is Cecile. I've known you since you were a child, Ismail." His voice was strangely calm, almost polite, which made everything even more terrifying. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just explained like a teacher giving a lesson. "You're surprised to see your brothers and sisters from the church here, aren't you? And you're shocked not to find the atheists you judged so harshly." As he spoke, Asiel began to walk around me. "This place is full of evangelicals, Catholics, Spiritists, Muslims, Buddhists, all kinds of religious people. Do you know why, Ismail?" I couldn't answer. I just stared at him trembling. "Because you knew the truth and you spat on it. You had access to the word, you knew what God wanted, you understood about love, forgiveness, mercy, and yet you chose the opposite. Now, Donato, Lucia, Todora, Octavio, Armando," he continued, "they never truly knew, they never had that complete revelation, they lived based on what they thought was right, on the conscience they possessed." So he stopped in front of me and crouched down until he was at eye level. "But you had the light and chose darkness. You preached love and practiced hate. You knew the truth and lived the lie, and you did all that in the name of God." Then he did something that completely destroyed me. So he extended his hand and a kind of screen appeared in the air like a gigantic, transparent television. "Do you want to see where they are now? Do you want to see the fate of those you condemned?" The screen began to display images and I recognized the place immediately. It was heaven, or at least what I had always imagined it to be, soft light, peace, a sense of wholeness that I could almost feel through that vision. I saw the people I was searching in hell in heaven. Adil said. Do you know what our best strategy is down here? With a sinister smile, it's not to make atheists. We lose atheists easily when they find the real truth and realize that God is love. Our best strategy is to make fake religious people like you were. Why? Because you lead people away from God better than any demon could. He let out a bitter laugh. You create atheists for us, Ismail. You destroy people's faith with your hypocrisy. You are our best weapon. That's why Jesus said back in Matthew, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. He concluded. You kept saying, Lord, Lord, all the time, Ishmael. You sang, you preached, you prayed, but your heart was ours. It always was. You used God's name as a shield for your ego, for your pride, for your hypocrisy. He started to walk away, but before disappearing completely into the shadows, he turned to me and said, now come with me. There are more things you need to see about who you really were. And I had no choice. I could only follow him deeper and deeper into that place of torment. Akil led me into a room that seemed to have no end. The walls were made of black stone, and in the center was a gigantic screen, larger than any movie theater I had ever seen. Sit down, he ordered, and I obeyed without question. Now you're going to see the movie of your life, Ismail, but not the version you told everyone at church, the real version. The one only you and God knew. The screen lit up, and the first scene made me want to disappear. It was my house, my room. One night in 2017, I saw Patricia coming into the room with that face of someone who had been crying. She had on the bed next to me. Ismail, we need to talk about our marriage. We're drifting further and further apart, she said, her voice breaking, and then I saw and heard my own response, and every word was like a gunshot to my chest. Shut up, woman, I'm tired, I worked all day, don't bother me, I yelled at her without even looking at her. On the screen, I saw Patricia's face crumbling. She got up and went to the bathroom, crying silently, and what did I do? I grabbed my phone and started watching pornography. Right there, while my wife cried 3 meters away, through the half-open door, I could see Matteo in his room. Awake, listening to everything, with tears streaming down his face. My son had heard me humiliating his mother, and it had scarred him forever. The scene shifted to my hardware store. The year was 2018. It was Felipe, that 19-year-old who worked with me, carrying a bag of cement. He tripped over something, and the bag fell, shattering on the floor. I saw myself approaching him, my face red with anger, my finger in his face. You incompetent idiot, you're going to pay for that mess, it's coming out of your paycheck, I yelled at him while other employees looked on uncomfortably. Felipe left the hardware store, his eyes filled with tears, and the camera followed him. He sat on the bench and sobbed uncontrollably, his hands trembling. I heard him talking to himself, I need this job, my mother is sick, I can't lose that money. Then the image flashed back to the hardware store where I was laughing with another employee. These losers can't do anything right, I said, laughing. In that hellish movie theater, I wanted to scream. I wanted to apologize to Felipe, but all I could do was watch. The next scene was the most painful yet. March 2019, church leadership meeting. We were discussing the case of Yolanda, a 21-year-old woman who had become pregnant out of wedlock. The senior pastor, a 60-year-old man, said, "Brothers, let's handle this with mercy. She's repentant, she's returning to God." And then I opened my mouth. "Mercy? She's a slut," I yelled, slamming my hand on the table. "She needs to be publicly disciplined. We have to make an example of her, otherwise, we're going to have a bunch of girls prostituting themselves out there thinking it's no big deal." I remember some brothers trying to calm me down, but I insisted, "No, the word is clear, sin must be exposed." The scene changed to Yolanda in her bathroom. 2 months later, she was holding a bottle of pills and had written a suicide note. She survived because her mother arrived in time, but I almost caused her death with my cruel judgment. The screen showed April 2019. I was alone in the church treasury counting the missions envelope. 12,000 pesos in cash. I saw myself writing 4,000 pesos in the church minutes, then putting 8,000 pesos in my jacket pocket. The image showed my face as I did that. There was no guilt, no remorse. I just thought, God will restore me anyway. He knows I need to pay those debts. I used the mission money that poor elderly people had saved penny by penny to pay off online bets I had lost. The last scene was the one that completely broke my heart. May 2019, Sunday lunch at the house of a brother from church. Several families gathered. That atmosphere of fellowship we always had. Someone mentioned Donato, my atheist co-worker, because he had helped fix a brother's car for free, and I said, with everyone listening, that atheist is going to burn in hell. Even if he does those things, deep down, he's immoral like all unbelievers, without any character. Everyone laughed and agreed with me as if I had spoken a great truth. But then the screen split in half and showed what Donato was doing at that exact moment. He was at the blood bank donating. It was the 10th time he had donated that year. Afterward, he went to the orphanage, where he volunteered every Sunday afternoon, bringing toys and candy he had bought with his own money. While I was judging and condemning him at a lavish church meal, he was literally saving lives and caring for orphans. The screen finally went black, and I was devastated, on my knees on the floor of that room, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm a monster, I screamed. I'm worse than all of them. I didn't love God, I loved being seen as a man of God. My religion was my stage, my ego, my mask. He stood there watching me for a while, then said, "You haven't seen even 10% yet, Ismail. There's a special place down here, a section reserved just for people like you. Come, you need to meet your true brothers." And before I could protest, he dragged me to an even deeper level of that hell. We went down a stone staircase that seemed endless. The deeper we went, the hotter it got. The thicker the air, the louder the shouts. Then he stopped at a huge iron door and looked at me. "This is the special section, Ismail," he said, "reserved for religious leaders, for those who had spiritual authority and used it to destroy instead of build." He pushed open the door, and what I saw made me want to run back. There were hundreds of people I recognized, famous pastors I saw on television, bishops who led huge churches, leaders I followed on social media, and the first one I recognized was Apostle Villagomez, 65 years old, owner of a megachurch in Cratero with 20,000 members. I idolized that man. I dreamed of being like him someday. He had a private plane, mansions, luxury SUVs, everything I thought was a blessing from God. "Ismail," said Apostle Villagomez when he saw me, his voice filled with shame, "you admired me, didn't you? You wanted to be like me." I couldn't answer. He began to tell his story. "I used God, son. My ministry was my business, my enterprise. I became a multimillionaire selling anointing oil for 500 pesos, water from the Jordan for 300 pesos, all false, all lies." He said I had 4 lovers, all supported by the church tithe, that I took money from poor widows to buy my 3rd mansion. Right next to him was a priest, Father Silverio, 68 years old. He had died in 2015. He was still wearing his black cassock, but it was all torn and burned. I was a priest for 40 years in Cratero. He told me without me asking anything, celibate on the outside, a monster on the inside. I abused 27 children throughout my life. I used the cassock as a shield, the church as my home. His words disgusted me so much that I walked away immediately, but he pushed me forward and introduced me to another man. "This is Don Abundio, leader of a religious community, 58 years old. He died last year." I had always been prejudiced against other beliefs. I always judged, always spoke ill of them. Don Abundio looked at me and said, "I know you judged me, evangelical, but I was no different from you." He told me that he deceived vulnerable people, charged fortunes for fake spiritual work, terrorized anyone who didn't pay him, telling them he would curse them. I didn't serve God, I served my greed. I destroyed families, I caused suicides with my threats and lies. I walked a little further and saw hundreds of other famous Christian singers living in adultery while singing about holiness. evangelists performing staged miracles, paying actors to fake healings, bishops living in $10 million mansions while church members starved, leaders sexually abusing followers and using Bible verses to silence the victims. It was an endless parade of hypocrisy, betrayal, and evil disguised as holiness. Their torment was unlike anything I had seen before. Each one was trapped, watching in an endless cycle, like in a movie theater, all the lives they had destroyed. Apostle Villagomez saw the suicides caused by his greed, the families destroyed because he took every last penny from poor people. Father Silverio saw the children who he abused them, now adults, destroyed, psychologically, some dead from overdoses, others from suicide. Don Abundio saw the people who went mad with fear because of his threats, the marriages destroyed by his lies, and then I saw someone who brought me to my knees again. It was Joshua, a 23-year-old who had been in my church. Joshua had died in a motorcycle accident 6 months before me, and everyone thought he had gone to heaven because he was a dedicated young man, but he was there. Ismail said, approaching me, "I wanted to be like you." His words were like a knife to the heart. "I copied the way you spoke, preached, and prayed." Joshua, he continued, tears welling in his eyes, "I learned from you that what mattered was appearing holy, not being holy. I learned that I could live however I wanted during the week, as long as I went on stage on Sunday and sang beautifully." He told me he started emotionally abusing his girlfriend because he saw me mistreating Patricia, that he started stealing because he saw me stealing from the church, that he became a hypocrite because I was his role model. "I'm here because of my own fault, Ismail. But you showed me the way." At that moment, a thunderous voice resonated throughout the area, making the walls tremble. It was a verse being repeated endlessly, hammering in my head. It would have been better for them not to have known the path of righteousness than, having known it, to turn away from the holy commandment. The phrase was repeated, repeated, repeated without ceasing, and I understood that all of us that knew the truth, we had access to the word, we knew what was right, but we chose wrong anyway, and that made our condemnation even more just, even more deserved. So he pulled me by the arm. "It's not over yet, Ismail. There's someone very important who wants to speak with you personally." And when he said that, I felt a terror I hadn't felt until that moment, because I knew exactly who wanted to speak with me. A presence entered that place and everyone bent over instantly, including me. It wasn't a choice, it was automatic, as if my body simply couldn't stand near that force. I expected to see a monster with horns and a trident, fire coming out of its mouth, that classic image you see everywhere, but when I looked up, I saw a man in a black Armani suit, impeccable hair, a seductive smile, looking like a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. His voice was as soft as honey, almost comforting. "Ismail, Ismail, my dear worship leader," he said, approaching me with slow, calculated steps, "you're suffering here, I know. You're seeing things you never imagined, discovering painful truths, but I came to make you a proposal, a special offer." He extended his hand toward me, that hand that seemed perfectly human, with well-groomed nails and a gold ring on the finger. "You can still get out of here, Ismail. I can send you back and make you the greatest pastor Cratero has ever seen." He began to detail the proposal with terrifying precision. "You're going to return to your body there in the hospital. You're going to wake up as national news. In 6 months, you'll be the senior pastor of your own church. In 2 years, your church will have 10,000 tithing members. Think about the money, Ismail." His smile widened as he continued, "In 5 years, you'll be on television, on YouTube with 5 million subscribers. Your face will be on billboards in Mexico City, Monterrey, all over the country. Pastor Ismail Vargas, the man who came back from the dead." The words created images in my head as if I was seeing it all happen. I saw myself writing a best-selling book called I Saw Hell and Came Back, selling 2 million copies. I saw myself doing an international tour, preaching in the United States, Europe, all of Latin America. I saw my bank account with 15,347,892. I saw a mansion, luxury SUVs, a private plane with my name on the side. I saw Patricia in the front pew of the church, wearing designer clothes, looking at me from the pulpit with pride in his eyes. "All of that can be yours again, Ishmael," he said in that mesmerizing voice. "You'll have your family back. The respect you lost, the comfort you had, you'll be admired, loved, followed by millions. There's just one very simple condition." He moved even closer and whispered in my ear, "Keep doing exactly what you did before, win souls for me while they think it's for him. Be my shepherd on earth, Ishmael. Lead people away from God with your hypocrisy. You do it better than any demon." I reached out for his, tears streamed down my face, but I was reaching out anyway. Our fingers were inches apart, almost touching. I could feel the warmth of his hand. In my head flashed everything I'd lost, everything I wanted back. At least I'll have my family, my CO.